Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, Kiran and Nisha. We have come a long way from in literature, but it can be anyone's argument that we have a long way to go before the women in literature are not passive to the plot, but actually active catalysts, making things happen. Their actions have consequences, messing up the plot, being the plot. And I have with me today four messy women who have done just that with their writing, created very, very, complex female characters that make you sit up and think that, okay, is it all right to be this way? Should we do something about it? And that's going to be my first question to all the panelists. And you can go in alphabetical order, of course. Is what is a messy woman according to y'all? Is it someone who's perhaps a little messed up emotionally, repressed, maybe self-centered, cruel, in dysfunctional relationships? And is that person messy because they are that way, or because they acknowledge it and choose to do nothing about it? So what really makes women messy? We can go in alphabetical order. So Jahnavi, I'll start with you.
Gayatri. Messy women, that's an interesting term. And let me start out by saying there are messy women and messy men. So let's not think women have the monopoly on being messy. And when you ask, what is a messy woman? I think two things stand out. As you said, it could be somebody a woman who stands out, a woman who's striking, a woman who changes things up, a woman who churns things up. And it could also be the other one you said, someone who's messed up. And that's a different person altogether. That's someone who, as you said, I have a character in my book, the matriarch, the grandmother, who's a brilliant person, very competent, very attractive, very loving in many ways to many people, but very strong-willed, and someone who doesn't tolerate any defiance, someone who doesn't allow anybody to resist. And that feeds into her relationships. And in a way, she's messed up and she messes things up because she's like that. So that the two kinds, I think, a good messy and a bad messy.
Kiran, do you want to go next?
I'm sorry. I keep forgetting to unmute. Sorry. So I think Jahnavi sort of hit the nail on the head, Gayatri, with that definition of women who are messy, because or women who are messed up. So the definition basically is the gaze of the other. What do people see her as? Do they see her as messy? Do they see her as messed up? I think it all boils down to not conforming to expectations of what people think. If they can't slot you into brackets, neat little boxes, then you become messy. You go beyond the boxes. You go beyond the boundaries that are set for you. I think I like to write about these women. I like to write about, all of us do. We write about women who don't want to be in these boxes and refuse to stay in these boxes. And that's why they're messy. They don't think they're messy. The world might think they're messy, but they're just doing what they have to do. So at the end of the day, I think that's what being messy is, doing what you have to do and not getting a damn.
Hi. When we talk about messy in terms of whether it's women or men, I think it's in contrast to what our ideal hero or heroine is. And I think the idea that our characters must be perfect and larger than life is something which is being challenged more and more across fiction. So whether it's genre fiction or whether it's literary fiction, I think in literary fiction, it was always a little less boxed. The hero's journey or the heroine's journey was never one of perfection. And of course, there are always going to be exceptions. But when we think about a more modern interpretation of these ideals and tropes, we are looking more and more at people who do break those barriers, as Kiran and Jahnavi said, the people who don't fit into neat boxes. And I mean, which of us does fit into a box of any kind? So as we turn to a more realistic fiction, this is what we are exploring, and it's the mess of life.
Yeah, Nisha.
It's really interesting. I was thinking also about when men write like strong women characters, even very evolved male writers usually sort of use a template of a smoking, drinking, don't care, that don't care feeling woman. That's the character. But when women write strong women characters, it's actually about the excess of our caring, right? It's about how much we care about things and the things that we are driven to do because we care about things. I mean, things that different characters or people care about might differ widely, but the mess comes from how much we care. And that's when we stop worrying about what people say, and we start doing strange things. So I was thinking about how I think inspired by Gillian Flynn, there's this Anne Helen Peterson essay about cool girls. And she says when male writers write cool girls, they're essentially just men in women's bodies, right? They just write women who use bad language, women who eat a lot and don't gain any weight, and just look good, but they're just dudes, right? But when women write cool girls, it's a completely different place, right? We are not so obsessed with the outward appearances of our male characters. We're interested in the furniture on the inside, right? And those women are admirable for not having gotten up in the morning and immediately made their bed. Like just before the session, I was just looking and I was saying, shit, I didn't make the bed and there's now no time. So I'm just going to stretch it to one side and just hope that it can't be really seen in this. So I mean, it makes fun. It's always fun to read in fiction the things that we can't do ourselves, even if it is as small as someone who refuses to clean her house before someone is, invited into it.
And so again, to all of you, and we can choose any order to answer that. Do you all set out to write messy women? Do you make a conscious decision? And the other thing is, as you're writing them, do they sometimes go against your sensibilities? And so do you find yourself fighting yourself to write those characters? Nisha, we can go into reverse order.
Reverse order. So well, not deliberately. I feel like deciding I'm going to write a deliberately strong character would be again a sort of trap to fall into. Like if you watch say shows like Scandal or How to Get Away with Murder, one of the criticisms early on with Shonda Rhimes characters was that, look, this is a strong woman character, why is she crying all the time, right? So then you're saying that the strong woman character has to conform to a certain kind of like that horrible word badass, which means that you don't cry and you're just like, again, a dude, right, in some sense. But I think when you allow yourself permission to write women characters and just take the story where it goes without worrying too much, and for so many of us writers, it is a place of a certain kind of fantasy. I don't mean fantasy as a genre, but it's a place of fantasy where our characters can do things. That's why we write fiction. Then it's not just about leaping from trains, like the Sarah Peretsky characters, who I love. They're always leaping from things, but it's also allowing our characters to be not very likable and say crap, and also feel crap. Like they might be very pleasant on the surface, but thinking like dirty things inside. All of that is also really fun to write.
Does anyone else want to?
Sure. I think when, just like Nisha said, if you plan to write someone, you're going to end up with a stereotype. But when you're putting a woman at the center of the action, she must, by default become the person driving it. So you have a situation where you can either conform to stereotype and do your beautiful heroine who's brave and whatever, and I've written several books like that as well, or you can choose someone who's deliberately not that. And there is a choice there, because one choice is considered much more to market. It is considered much more saleable in a sense. Someone who you could see on a Netflix show, for instance. While if you write someone who, is much more messy, it is bucking the trend. But to say that the conscious choice has already been made by that point. So you're down that road.
I think for me, when I write, the main aim is to make it interesting and to make the character particularly. Most of my fiction is very character driven, not very plot driven at all. to make the character as interesting as possible. And I don't think the stereotypical happy heroine is that interesting at all. She's sometimes so flat. So just by default, I think an interesting character, a messy woman, it makes for a much more interesting person. And I write a lot of family stuff, and families are messy. And in my last book, Undertow, the core relationship is that of mother-daughter across 2 generations, a grandmother, granddaughter, a mother-daughter in the center. And this is the most messy relationship of all. So I think when you're writing fiction, as you said, as compared to nonfiction, fiction always has these messy men and women. And I certainly write mostly messy people.
Kiran, if you have something to add to that, otherwise my next question is to you, Kiran.
Sorry. I think, yes, I do agree with what everyone said, that we don't set out to write messy women. We write women, and women are messy. We're not, spice and roses and pink rainbows and all that is imagined of us. So there's so much of internality in all the women that we write. So it automatically comes out in our protagonists, in the women we write. They are messy. And they're very unapologetically messy. I think if I started to think that I'm going to write a messy woman, she would be terrible. Like Madhumita said, she would be just a stereotype. But when I start to write a real woman, someone I know and someone I think I could know and I could visualize, then she brings to that character all the messiness that comes with the reality that she could be. So that's my only take on this.
And when you do that, Kiran, do you find the urge to make your characters likable? Because readers sometimes can be very judgmental of women who are messy, but male counterparts, they may say it's okay to be that way. So do you sometimes feel apologetic for your characters, or give them a reason to be messy, give them a backstory maybe? Do you find the need to do that, to make them likable?
No, I don't think so. I get very bored by likable people myself, and I wouldn't want to read somebody who's too likable. All my female protagonists have been terribly conflicted, have grappled with all sorts of issues. There's been an illegitimate child. There's been a widow who's grappling with her sexual needs and desires. There's been a middle-aged housewife with mental issues who's abandoned her children. So they've been very, very messy, and they've been very unlikable, and unapologetically so. I don't think I can write a likable character so that my reader finds her likable. She just is what she is, and take her walks and all.
Madhumita, in your book Dirty Women, your protagonist goes against the conventional mores of society, if you may. So how much of today's voyeurism that is kind of unjustly and maybe disproportionately directed against women influenced your writing in that sense? Because she gets hounded a bit because of what she is.
Yeah, the character Drishti, who's at the center of this book, is she's a musician, she's a singer, and she's a single mother, and she's jealously protective of her own privacy. And when her child goes missing, it's exploded for the entire city to see, and it's completely ripped from the headlines. I will make no apologies for that. Like, it is I think we see it time and again. Every time there is a tragic event, it is always the parents in general who are brought under scrutiny, but specifically the mothers, and specifically when the mother is interesting in some way, whether she's famous or whether it's because she leads a life that others can't understand, it is called into question, and she is made the villain, whether she is the victim or not. And it is the voyeurism is an unfortunate part of being in the media spotlight today. And Drishti is, I think quite a few readers have responded to say that she's difficult to understand, even for those who are sympathetic to her. Like, all of her choices are a little different because she is that person. And when we look at anyone through the lens of a camera, we think we know them, but we never really do. And I think that was the heart of this story.
And Nisha, taking on from where Madhumita said about writing people whose choices are difficult, is it even more difficult to write about a millennial complex female character? I mean, does that add another, level of complexity? Does technology kind of making some part of the physicality of description become irrelevant? Does that add a layer of complexity, or is it just the same? Just wanted you to weigh in, because in your book there's a lot of technology in the last book, of course, which is the women who forgot to.
I mean, yes and no. For instance, there is this one story called No Filter, in which a man reconnects with his ex-girlfriend who is married, and how he reconnects with her is for a while, when they reconnect, they're still online, and then later on he moves to be near her. And through this time, there's a lot of uncertainty in his relationship. He thinks they're back together even though she's married, and there's ambiguity, but he tries to gauge her daily mood by looking at what she's posting on Instagram, right? And so periodically he's baffled because she's posting these like super sexy and intimate pictures with her husband. So he's baffled by it and like trying to like use this as some sort of tea leaf reading of where their relationship is going. But that kind of, femme fatale figure who's ambiguous and driving this man completely bananas. I mean, he's so readily willing to be bananas, but driving him bananas. That's a sort of standard like pillar of like crime fiction, pillar of all kinds of fiction, right? Femme fatales exist. Now it's a femme fatale plus Instagram. It's just that.
Jahnavi, in your book Undertow, your protagonist is trying to come to terms with what is family, home, belonging. Do you think belonging is more of an existential question for women than it is for men?
Not really. Not really. I think home is a word which evokes the strongest emotion in both men and women in different senses of the word. I think for men, for women, perhaps the physical home, the structure, the house, the children, the family carries more weight. I think for men, when they say home, it's village, it's state, it's country, it's nation, that different facets of it. But just home, I think, really is important to both gender, and that makes for a lot of messiness. In my book, it's someone thrown out of home. It's the daughter for marrying into another community. Then it's the daughter coming back home after 25 years to try and look for a home she's never found. Not just a physical home. She's never felt at home in her family in Bangalore. She thinks if she relocates to Assam, she might find a more suitable home there, but it's not really as simple as that, is it? So no, I don't think gender plays into it. I think home is a very complex, a very evocative thing for all of us.
Right. So I do have more questions, but I thought we'd have one reading done in the middle and, break the monotony of too much back and forth. So whichever of you, whoever wants to go first, maybe put up your hands, I don't know. Just give a context of the passage you're reading so that the audience kind of is able to catch the nuances of what you're reading, and then maybe a 2-minute reading. Anyone, I mean, or should I? Madhumita, I want to go first.
Okay, the bit I'm reading is quite short. It's from one of the early chapters of the book. And it is Drishti, who is the mother in the book. And the book is basically about a child who goes missing rather mysteriously from her own home. And she's quite young. She's 4 years old at that time, or maybe 5, I forget. Anyway, so it is also the story of a complicated mother-daughter relationship, which Jahnavi alluded to earlier as well. Yeah, okay. It's a bit of a flashback for the character. Okay. So here's what Drishti remembered. Sore nipples, cracked and bleeding, a small mouth, too small even to smile, feet so delicate that the light passed through them, eyes unfocused, and yet an entire life already lay in wait within them. Everything she'd ever be, she already was. And then the wailing, hunger, constant, instant, indefatigable, both of theirs. The zombie land between sleep and wakefulness that went on for months. The backbreaking pain of sitting up all night with a nursing child. The fear, the awe, the immensity of the moment she had to leave the hospital for home. The awareness that once she walked through those swinging doors, it would be her and her alone. And despite her own throbbing pain, someone else would always come first for the rest of her life. The darkness that came in waves, crashing over the beauty of the moments and the memories. What she didn't remember, the neighbor's gossip, her parents' absence, her bank balance.
Give you a bit of context, my book, the novel Undertow, is about, at the core of it, a young woman from Assam, practically exiled from her family by her mother, very strong, messy mother, for marrying into another community. And it comes full circle when this woman who was sent away, her young daughter grows up and defies her mother to go back to Assam in search of her lost family. And what I'm reading, very short extracts, a bit of a description about the mother-daughter, the first relationship, the young woman Rukmini who's thrown out and her mother, Usha. So this is, as she's going, the first scene is when this young woman is leaving home against her parents' wishes, her mother's wish specifically, to go marry her husband. And she's driving to the place there's going to be a registration marriage. And as she goes through the streets of a city, Guwahati, she they had arrived at the bend in the Riverside Road and had turned left towards Lotta Hill Field. Rukmini looked up. In the far distance, rising up from the river was Nilachal, the blue hill, the sacred hill where goddess Kamakya's powerful temple stood. Legend had it that when the great god Shiva, maddened by grief after his beloved wife's death, roamed around earth carrying her mutilated body, her yoni had fallen here. A temple was erected to honor it. Rukmini bowed her head, as she always did, to the hill, to the many splendored, formidable Devi, who, it was said, still menstruated in her chamber deep under the earth. Patron goddess, protectress of her land, Kamakya was adored by her people. She made Rukmini unaccountably uneasy. Stories of the Devi's limitless powers have been part of her childhood. Her grandmother, Aita, has spoken of the Devi's intransigence when defied, her vengeance when wronged. And Rukmini was reminded of Ukha, her mother. She and the Devi had a lot in common. Ukha was a generous benefactor but she was equally ferocious in her antagonism when she sensed the slightest resistance. Rukmini saw that Torun, this is her father, had opted for absolute surrender. And she could understand that now that she was in love. And Orun, her older brother, was fortunate in that Ukha allowed him a lot of space to conduct his life in the manner he chose to. The servants treated Ukha with a mixture of love and watchful fear, and they survived well. But Rukmini had not played by the rules. She loved her mother. Indeed, was in awe of her brilliance and competence and flamboyance. She longed to be her friend. At the same time, she found herself unable to condone her mother's smooth manipulations, her domineering will that made plain that everything had to be her way or the highway. Rukmini had always thought to herself under her breath, even in her mind, and she always stood her ground. It was no surprise that Ukha and she never became friends.
I like the way Ma Kamakya herself is shown to be a messy woman.
Yes, very messy woman indeed.
So before we go on to some other readings, we'll just ask another question of all of you. And that is, when you write complex female characters, do you feel misandry creeping into your writing? And if you do feel that, if you acknowledge that it's there, do you try to stop it, or do you say, no, I'm going to indulge it and let the pendulum swing way far back so that things can come back on keel? Anyone?
I don't think it does, at least, and maybe my definition of misandry is not what others would agree upon. But the idea that a strong woman also needs to be surrounded by other strong characters for her to stand on her own, I think is one that I carry. If you have a strong woman who is only strong in the absence of other strength, then it doesn't really have the same impact. Messy, strong women attract messy, strong people, whether it's other men or other women, and I like to see it that way.
No, I don't think so, Gayatri. I think I don't go out of my way to sort of highlight any one gender's flaws or weaknesses. But yes, the effort is always to write interesting people. And again, strong, messy men are way more interesting than someone who's bland or translucent. So to add texture, to add sort of richness to the relationships, I tend to bring in the last book, there was a very messy man who kind of destroyed his marriage, and the book couldn't have happened if he'd not been there. So I think your plot or your story sort of demands or defines who and how you'll write.
Kiran, Nisha?
Yeah. Nisha, you going first?
Sure. I was like giggling throughout. No, I was just remembering that one of the first, though you're advised against it, I read one of the first Amazon reviews that appeared on my book. I see Kiran flinching. So, and it said, thinly veined, not veiled, thinly veined misandry. And I was giggling then also. But so do I swing towards misandry? I think, let's just say that when I meet annoying people, I take notes. For fiction. I think we should just stop there.
So I think Gayatri, very honestly, it's very interesting that none of us set out to write misandry. We just write real men and and in all their complexities, I think I have a husband who is not the perfect husband in 2 of my books. I have a man who has sort of left his lover. They are complex characters in themselves, and we don't hate them. We just need them as foils to our messy women, don't we? so that's my take. I think I try to write them as honestly as I can. I'm not being misandristic about it. And if it comes across that way, I don't know. It depends on who's reading the book. A woman might nod her head and say, okay, yeah, that's how it is. A man might say, no, she's got something in it for men out here. So at the end of it, it just depends on who's reading the book and interpreting. Everybody reacts very differently to a character or a book. So I think that's what it is.
Madhumita, I just have a question for you. When you say strong female character, sometimes there's a bit of condescension in that, as though that's something that's rare, something to be surprised about. But in your writing, I think the character was, just par for the course. She's just another character in what is essentially a whodunit. Is that a fair kind of estimate of your writing, that the strong women character is just part of the story and not really set out to be detailed that way?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think all of us are sort of arriving at this in our own way. We write the characters that appeal to us. As writers, this is who we are, and the characters flow from who we are as people, whether we're taking notes about the funny ones we meet, or whether, I cannot tell you how many times I've been asked in, whichever book it was. My first series was a very hard-boiled female detective, but she wasn't your cigarette smoking, hard drinking person. And it shocked people that I had chosen to write a female detective. And it never even occurred to me that this should be something that shocked people. Like, I genuinely do not understand it in, that time it was 2012, but now it's 2021. We're making very, very little progress in this direction, and I do not understand why.
Kiran, in your book, More Things in Heaven and Earth, your protagonist kind of flies in the face of what you would expect a widow to be going through. Of course, the grief is palpable, but there's one place where she actually says, widowhood gave me freedom. And of course, the context is of financial freedom, but the reader's wondering, did you mean more than that, right? And then she's also having, she has a sexual appetite for more than one man. So is this, maybe you could just talk about that a bit.
Gayatri, one of the earliest reviews of the book, and we're not supposed to read reviews, but we can't resist it. It's like the horror movie that you watch from behind a cushion. So one review very horrifiedly said, she's a widow, but she's having sex with two men, not at the same time. So that was a shock to the reader. I think that she's not being the widow you imagined her to be. She's not being she's grieving, but yet she's not grieving because she's in one sense also moving on, and she's acknowledging the needs of the body, and she's very unapologetic about it. And I never set out to write her to shock anybody. I didn't set out to, make a statement with that. That was just who she was. And her life, if you read the book, I mean, her marriage wasn't the marriage that, you'd expect her. She grieves for her husband. There is love, but there is also something very dark beneath all that. And perhaps she was trying to reclaim herself. And that's what I wanted to show. She was trying to reclaim agency of herself and her body through that, through her behavior. And it was completely valid for her. It was her way of exercising. It's a scary book, so I'll use the word, exercising some demons. So that's what it was.
And Jahnavi, I think you've taken messiness to a whole new level. You had not one, not two, but three messy women in one book. As someone who wants to write, I need some tips. How do you kind of etch out so many complex characters in one book? How do you draw lines? How do you say, this is what how is the whole process? It's just mind-boggling that you can write three strong women in one book.
I think Madhumita said, I think you mentioned that we write what we like to read. And I think for me, certainly my writing is hugely influenced by what I like to read. And I write the book I would be happy reading. And I write the characters I would be interested in, I think. And if you go through your own history or your own experiences, and you, as you said, take notes, we said it in a humorous way, but literally a lot of things, you absorb so much as you live. And you have these, you almost have these women there ready to sort of jump onto the page, as it were. And especially when you talk about mother-daughter, there are so many kinds of mother-daughter relationships. It can be one of the most rewarding, the most fulfilling relationship, and it can be one of the hardest, most unforgiving relationship there is. And you read, you watch films, you observe, you experience, you absorb, and I think these characters just come out. And like I said, the story defines a character, and sometimes the relationship brings out the character in full flesh. And for me, it was the Rukmini, that the central protagonist, the two women here who are central to the story, Rukmini and her daughter Loya. Rukmini is a doctor. She's a working professional, and she's a very quiet girl, quiet woman, as compared to her mother, who's fairly vocal, loud, assertive. And I think that quietness sort of came as a response to her mother's dominating personality. She defies her mother. She leaves Assam to come to Bangalore to marry the man of her choice, another doctor. But yet, when it came to her husband leaving up another woman, she didn't speak up at all. So it depends on what level of messiness the woman is at. And Loya, the younger daughter, the young daughter who then grows up as a people pleaser. When you grow up in conflict zones, very often the children learn to please. Yeah. The children learn not to rock the boat, and she pleases at school, she pleases in all her relationships. But suddenly when she's 25, one day she feels that something is wrong and I need to get out of this box before it's too late. And she defies her mother completely and totally and just boards a flight to Assam. So I think the story brings out certain characters, and your experiences sort of feed into that. And it's a complex mix of all that when you write.
Right. Nisha, one last question to you specifically is you've done a translation recently, and that also has a strong female character. So how is it when you translate someone like that? Do you find do you feel the itch to sort of say, no, I want to do this a little differently? How do you stay true to the translation?
So, well, the thing is, okay, the person whose book I translated, Kiran, she is a genius. Okay, so that's where we need to begin. And all her books are equally compelling. And if just to give you a sense of context, she's won every literary award in Malayalam, and she's also a best-selling author. So say this book, which came out in 2020, has sold some ridiculous, I don't know, 30,000 copies or something. Okay, so I mean, that's the context. So for me, to translate her work is it's the high point of my life. Okay, so I just feel really, really grateful to have that opportunity. And she writes super interesting women characters. This particular book, it's called Kabar. The character is a judge, a district level judge, and there is a petition before her, which is notionally a land dispute, but when you see it, it will mirror like larger issues. And the petitioner in her court is a young Muslim man, an architect. He's very good looking. She's a single woman. There's all sorts of things going on. I mean, basically, all I needed to do was just like try to do my job and just translate the book and do nothing. It's a great book.
And have any of you had women come up to you and say, this is me. Nobody has seen this, but this is me. And thank you for writing me and normalizing me. Have any of you had that experience? Someone calling you and telling you that? Or
I think very often. I think either I'm writing about women just under the bell curve, or there are many people out there who have similar experiences, particularly young women. So with this book, Loya, the young woman, I think a lot of people in this generation are products of perhaps inter-community, inter-geographical area marriages, unlike my generation, our parents tended to be in arranged marriages and in similar communities. So many kids came up and said that we feel for Loya. We understand one leg here, one foot there, the complexity of it all and the pain and the joy of it all. So a lot of young women writing and meeting and saying, yes, it resonated.
And another question again for anyone is, do you all at any point feel that once you just want to write a damsel in distress Disney character just because it goes against the grain of your writing? Do you want to try that ever?
I did that, Gayatri. I've done chicklet and romance also. And I've written messy women also.
And what are the differences in experience for you? I mean, how would you quantify that? What would you feel about that? Is it differently rewarding? Is it, I mean, I'm just curious because that's a big gap that you've managed to kind of cross.
Let's just say, even in my romances, there was never a happily ever after. There's always a happily right now. So the women are not looking for a forever. They're not looking for, whatever. The Prince Charming may be there because that's the need of the genre and, he has to come and sort of sort things out. But they're happy with it being right now. They're not looking for anything to save them forever and ever and ever. So I think they're also a tad messy in that sense.
No, I completely agree with Kiran. There's, I think, the best romance novels, even if the woman is looking for love and all of that, she need not be in distress.
Yeah.
I think that's gone.
All right. So I think Nisha and Kiran will just have a bit of your reading as well.
Sure.
Whoever goes first is fine.
Kiran?
Yep. Okay. So Gayatri, since you spoke about the widowhood passage, I think I'll read that one out. I think that's one that, as you said, many women have come back to me with that passage. And just to give you some context, my protagonist is Kamala Malik. She's 33. She's widowed. And she's lost her husband rather suddenly in a distant place far away. And she's trying to come to terms with his death and with how her life and her circumstances have changed after that. I was widowed at 33. I weighed the word, speaking it without sound, feeling the mouth form it, pursing the lips with the W and contracting into a circle with the OW. Constrained into a circle of one, I kept rolling the word around in my head on my palate, tasting it, straining it for tenacity and give, testing its hold on me. There was a certain bereftness to the word itself, but it contained within its bereftness a quiet power, that of survival, of tenacity, of grit, the grit, a residue of generations of hardy women who had outlived their husbands and survived, raised children, lived out their lives. Widowhood now gave women power, where once it had reduced them to outcasts. I was a widow, and widowhood had given me freedom. How did other women come to terms with losing a husband? Did they pick up pieces of their shattered selves and glue them back together, sealing the joints with metal to prevent them from falling apart again? At the slightest whiff of remembrance, motes of a residual post perfume, familiar and overwhelming in a justificated elevator, a familiar stretch of shoulder and head in the distance in a crowd, snatches of a song that had been played when. So that's a bit where she knows what widowhood has given her, but she's still longing for what she had.
Lovely, lovely.
While we wait for Nisha, if anyone has a question, please do come up here. Okay, so then we'll just wait. So we are just one last reading and then we'll come to you. Thank you. Yeah, Nisha.
So I'm reading from No Filter, the story that I mentioned. At this point in the story, the first person narrator is a man. He works in a software company. He's working in Gurgaon. Just before the point at which I start reading, he and his wife had met someone in their building, another couple, who suddenly started a conversation about their open marriage. And so this leaves him and his wife sort of rattled. The next day, he's unable to stop thinking about it, and it leads to his reconnecting with the ex-girlfriend. So that's where this begins. The next day at work, I couldn't stop thinking about the poor idiots. They obviously did feel something unfathomable existed outside their boring marriage. But like dogs who sensed ghosts, they could only walk around in circles in the garden barking. I stared at the hump of fat on the neck of the young developer who sat in front of me, and I felt sorry for the woman he was marrying. He had been meeting her at a different mall in Gurgaon every weekend ever since their engagement. Imagine having sex with him. I, on the other hand, was as fit as the very last time Liji and I had been together. Much more, actually. In all her Instagram pictures, Liji now had the cat eyes style eyeliner. I liked it a lot. That was the only way in which she had really changed in all the years we'd been separated. After a whole day of staring at that developer's neck hump for hours, I looked for my Liji on Facebook and found her. I pinged her for the first time in 7 years. Liji and I first reconnected on Facebook Messenger, the world's most unromantic chat application. For several days, we didn't shift to WhatsApp. We didn't discuss it, but shifting felt like a decision with great implications. Once we did shift, within a few hours, I began to wish Akansha would go away and Sebastian would go away. If they would only leave and leave us alone. We took many pictures in the backwaters on our first trip together after Akansha passed away. This was before I moved to Bangalore. I remembered right away to delete the photos from my phone after downloading them and hiding the files. I told Liji too, as if Sebastian would ever check, she said. I checked her Instagram regularly. Mostly they were just beautiful pictures of her. I couldn't bear to see her selfies with her idiotic husband, but she giggled when I asked her about them. We have selfies instead of sex, don't be jealous. Then she'd giggle more. Sebastian never saw those photos of us alone in a boat in still green waters, alone in the most beautiful landscape in the world. Alone, except for the boatman. But later the police did. With the resort staff, Liji liked to pretend she didn't understand Malayalam. I didn't want to come back to Kerala for the weekend, but Liji had insisted. I thought she would say, let's never go to Kerala again. In college, we couldn't wait to get out, far away from the sticky, sweaty people pressing on us. Unexpectedly, in the water, I felt free, speaking Malayalam to the boatman and being ourselves. When we were in the boat, I saw a tiny house on a handkerchief-sized island, an island just a few feet bigger than the house. And I asked Liji, shall we come live here? She waved her hand at the water and the sky. Here, without network.
Thank you. Lovely.
Thank you for the session. Anybody can take this. According to your definition of who a messy woman is, who do you think is the Indian male author who has done justice while creating masterclass messy women characters? Thank you.
I would say Manto.
So great question. And I'll just give you one example from the latest book, in which Uha, the very dominating mother, the very dominating matriarch, very messed up woman, very messy relationship with her daughter and son-in-law, but fabulous wife. She had a fabulous marriage. So if you go through the book, and they had this almost picture perfect marriage, she and her husband, where they would just bake a cake to celebrate bird nesting in the garden. He would bunk work to have lunch with her and listen to music. So yes, there are happy marriages out there.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's all the time we have for this session. Thank you, panelists, for a wonderful session.